It's officially been about a month since I released part 1 of this project. I definitely planned on getting part 2 out sooner, but even if it's a little late, I didn't want to leave half of Olympus unfinished. So today we're finally completing my Greek gods and My Little Pony project. If you missed the first video, first off, I suggest you go checking it out. It was a really cool video. But if you're just here to watch this one, then basically what I did was I took the Olympic gods and redesigned them as My Little Pony characters using their mythology, symbols, personalities, and domains to influence their colors, clothing, species, and environment. I also created a small looping animation for every illustration rather than adding movement just because I could. I wanted each animation to reinforce something about the character. Part 1 covers Zeus, Poseidon, Demeter, Athena, Ares, Aphrodite, and Hephaestus, and for part 2 we're moving on to Hera, Hermes, Dionysus, Apollo, Artemis, and Hestia. And yes, technically that pushes this project beyond 12 designs, but depending on the version of the Olympian lineup, Dionysus or Hestia can occupy that final position. Instead of choosing between them, I decided to include both, especially because Hestia is one of my favorite goddesses, so there's absolutely no chance I was gonna leave her out. Just like before, I'll be talking about who each god or goddess is, my vision for their design, and the color palette and symbolism I used, and what I chose to animate. If you enjoy character designs, mythology, animation, or My Little Pony, consider subscribing. Now, let's return to Olympus and start with their queen. When I designed Zeus for part 1, his entire piece was built around establishing him as the king of Olympus. For Hera, I wanted the same level of authority, but I didn't want her to feel like a variation of Zeus. She needs to look like a queen completely on her own. Hera is the goddess of marriage, queenship, and one of the most important goddesses of Olympus. A lot of her mythology focuses on her difficult marriage with Zeus, with all of his affairs. And I didn't want jealousy or anger to become the entire identity of this design. Instead, my vision centers around elegance, status, and control. I started with a white coat, which gives her a clean base and lets the strong colors surrounding her stand out. Her mane is made up of deep navy blue, royal blue, turquoise, and bright teal. I wanted it to feel luxurious, so I gave her large waves and curls rather than just a simple hairstyle. The same sense of richness carries into all of her accessories. I used a lot of gold throughout her crown, jewelries, and clothing. Because Hera is the queen of Olympus, I felt like she could use a little more decoration than most of the other characters without the design becoming too busy. The gold also really works against the cool colors of her mane. The part of this design that immediately identifies her is the peacock tail. Peacocks are one of Hera's most recognizable symbols. In the later versions of the myth of Argus, the eyes of the 100-eyed guardian becomes connected with the eye spots of Hera's peacock feathers. Instead of simply giving her a peacock accessory, I wanted the symbolism to completely change her silhouette. So her tail is essentially an enormous set of peacock feathers. I used several shades of green, from deep forest tones to lighter jade, to finish the feathers with a dark blue eye spot that connects back to her mane. When the tail is lowered, it almost resembles a train of a royal gown. The environment around her is much softer. She stands among tall grass and small colorful flowers beneath purple and blue sky, which help all of those greens, golds, and jewel tone colors stand out, and the tail becomes an obvious choice for the animation. It begins folded behind her before slowly lifting and spreading outwards. The individual feathers fan across the background until they form this huge peacock display behind her. Then everything gradually folds back into place. What I like most is that Hera herself barely needs to move. The entire spectacle happens around her while she stays poised and composed. That's exactly the feeling I wanted from her. She is just showing her status as the queen of Olympus. From someone incredibly composed, we're moving to a god who seems physically incapable of staying in one place. Hermes is the messenger of the gods and associated with travel, communication, merchant, thieves, boundaries, and guiding souls. Movement is built into practically every part of his mythology, so making him into a Pegasus was one of the easiest species choices of the entire collection. I wanted his design to feel lightweight and fast. His coat is a very pale white, while his mane and tail use soft, icy blues. Those colors stand out against the much darker environment without making him feel heavy. Then I used gold as a main accent color. His caduceus is gold along with the smaller decorative pieces around his face and clothing. I also included brown straps around his legs as reference to the sandals he's so famously associated with. Hermes is often showed with winged sandals, but considering I already turned him into a Pegasus with an entire pair of wings, I didn't really think he desperately needed another set. The caduceus is something I absolutely wanted to include. It's probably one of the symbols that most immediately connects back to Hermes. Rather than incorporating it to a cutie mark or background element, I wanted him to actively be carrying it on him. The environment is also probably my favorite part of this piece. The entire framing is surrounded by dark leaves and branches, while the opening in the center reveals a bright blue violet night sky filled with stars. It creates a perspective that we're staring underneath the canopy of the trees, looking upwards. I kind of wanted to make it feel like Hermes was darting between trees up like above them, so you kind of had to catch him. And I feel like that's what this animation does. He flies into view, crosses the opening between the trees, and disappears, and eventually circles back through to be in the middle of the scene. His wings move as he travels, while his body, mane, tail, clothing stretch in the direction of his flight. There are even moments in the background is completely empty, and I really like that. The animation isn't about watching Hermes pose, it's about catching a glimpse of him while he's already on his way somewhere else. After all the constant movement of Hermes, Dionysus brings the video into a much quieter scene. But this piece isn't only about wine or celebration. For Dionysus, I wanted this artwork to represent one of my favorite stories connected to him, the story of Dionysus and Ariadne. Dionysus is the god of wine, theater, celebration, and festivity. Because those are some of his most recognizable associations, I still wanted his design to carry that rich, indulgent feeling. His coat is a light cream which gives me a softer base and strong colors around him. His mane uses deep berry pinks, magentas, burgundies, and wine purple, immediately connecting his palette back to grapes and wine. I continued that symbolism with the grape crown around his head, mixing dark purple grapes with golden leaves. Gold also appears throughout his jewelry, while the loose white fabric and brown sandals details give him a more relaxed and classical look. But most important detail of this piece is actually what's behind him. The constellation in the night sky represents the crown of Ariadne, which becomes the constellation Corona Borealis, or the Northern Crown. Ariadne is probably best known for helping Theseus escape the Minotaur's labyrinth. She gave him the thread that allowed him to find his way back after defeating the Minotaur. But after they escape and leave Crete, Theseus leaves Ariadne behind on the island of Naxos. That's where Dionysus enters her story. Dionysus finds Ariadne after she's been abandoned, falls in love with her, and eventually takes her as his wife. One tradition says Ariadne receives a beautiful crown, and that crown was later placed amongst the stars to become the constellation Corona Borealis. That was the part of the story I really wanted to represent here. Instead of putting Ariadne directly in the illustration, I like the idea of her presence being represented through the stars above Dionysus. It makes the background more than a decoration. The constellation becomes a small piece of the storytelling, and I think it also shows a different side of Dionysus. He's usually portrayed through wines, party, and chaos, but his relationship with Ariadne gives him a much more romantic and compassionate story than people might expect. For the animation itself, I kept the movement very subtle, Dionysus simply lounging beneath the stars with his legs gently swinging back and forth. I didn't want a huge magical effect competing with the constellations or the quieter feeling of the scene. He's surrounded by greenery, flowers, and a deep indigo sky, while Ariadne's crown remains above him in the stars. Even though the animation is one of the simplest in the collection, the background carries much more of the story. And I really like that contrast. At first, it looks like Dionysus is simply relaxing beneath a beautiful night sky. But once you know that what the constellation represents, the entire piece becomes a reference to someone important in his story. For Apollo and Artemis, I approached the illustration differently from everyone else. Because they're twins, I didn't want the designs to be completely separate pieces. I wanted their artwork to function as one composition. Apollo and Artemis are the children of Zeus and Leto, but even though they're twins, the visual symbolism surrounding them makes them almost perfect opposites. So I built their entire piece around that contrast. Starting with Apollo, I wanted his side to feel like sunlight. Apollo has a huge number of domains in Greek mythology. He's associated with music, prophecy, poetry, healing, archery, and several other aspects of Greek culture. He's also strongly associated with the sun in a later tradition, even though Helios was traditionally the god who was personified as the sun itself. For this design, I decided to embrace Apollo's solar imagery. His coat is a very pale cream with large white wings shaded with a warm gold. His mane is the part that really dominates this design. It's incredibly long, bright golden yellow hair that stretches behind him and wraps around the center of the piece. I also wanted to look like sunlight flowing off of him. The bright gold could easily overwhelm the whole design, so I introduced a strong red throughout his clothing. The deep crimson fabric breaks apart the yellow and cream while giving him a much more dramatic silhouette. I also used small brown and gold details around his legs, neck to keep the Greek-inspired styling consistent with the other gods. His blue eyes are one of the only cool elements of his side of the palette, kind of to tie back into his sisters. Behind Apollo, the background glows with yellows, orange, and gold. Rather than ending at the center, his mane curves around the larger circle shape between them, and that's where his design begins to connect with Artemis. Where Apollo is built around warmth, Artemis is almost entirely cool. Artemis is the goddess of the hunt, wilderness, wild animals, as well as a protector of young women. She later strongly connects with lunar imagery, while Selene is traditionally the actual personification of the moon. That gave me the visuals I wanted for the twins, both sun and moon, day and night. Her coat is a soft gray with blue and lavender undertones, immediately separating her from Apollo's cream and gold. Then I used the much darker navy and indigo around her head and mane. Apollo's hair is enormous and free-flowing, so I wanted Artemis to feel much more controlled and focused. Her clothing follows the same idea. It's made from layers of royal blue, periwinkle, navy, and silver. The cooler palette makes her feel like moonlight against Apollo's warm sunlight. I also added small lunar details in her accessories rather than covering the entire design in crescent moons. The silhouettes were probably the most important part of designing these two. Apollo's golden mane curves from the top of the illustration toward Artemis, while Artemis's long blue shape curves from the back below back towards Apollo. Together they create a circular motion around the center. The background follows the same pattern, transitions from bright orange and yellow to deep navy blues. I really wanted it to kind of look like an eclipse. There are no straight lines separating the two sides, they kind of flow into each other, and that's what I wanted this animation to reinforce. Instead of giving Apollo and Artemis separate animation effects, the twins move together within the same circular composition. Their bodies shift and float while the shapes created by their wings, hair, clothing, tails continue to guide your eyes around the center. The movement is subtle, but it makes the entire illustration feel like one continuous cycle. Apollo represents the light, Artemis represents the darkness. One doesn't erase the other. Day eventually becomes night, and night eventually becomes day. I originally thought this would be a perfect ending for this project. Ending on the sun and moon together felt huge, but there's still one goddess that's missing, and there's no way I was going to end the series without her. Hestia is my favorite Greek goddess. Even though she technically gave up her seat to Dionysus, I still really wanted to include her. I actually think she's the perfect way to end this entire collection. Hestia is the goddess of the hearth and the sacred fire at the center of the home. Her domain isn't as enormous or dramatic as many of the other Olympians. Zeus has the sky, Poseidon has the sea, Apollo and Artemis have all these imagery surrounding the sun and moon. Hestia has the hearth, and that's exactly what I love about her. Her power represents something much smaller and more personal. Warmth, safety, and a place to gather, a place to return to. That became the entire vision behind her design. Her coat is a soft coral pink. I could have made everything dark red or orange because she's associated with fire, but I wanted Hestia herself to feel more gentle. The stronger fire colors appear in her hair and the clothing instead. Her mane is incredibly bright orange and it falls forward towards the flames beside her. Visually, the shape of her hair almost blends in with the shape of the fire. I really like the idea that the connection between Hestia and the hearth could be shown without needing to literally turn her mane into flames. Draped around her is a peplos. If you don't know what that is, it's basically a piece of cloth that is pinned at both shoulders and allowed to drape down the body, while the top section sometimes folds over the head to create a modest and ceremonial covering. It's probably one of my favorite parts of her clothing because it changes her entire silhouette. The fabric is deep red with warm gold trims. Rather than it looking like royal clothing or armor, it feels heavy and comfortable, almost like she's wrapped in warmth. I continued those gold accents through the bands around her legs and the decoration. The fire itself uses a bright yellow, cream, orange, so it immediately becomes the bright point in this entire illustration. Then I placed all those warm colors against a dark blue and violet interior. The contrast was important because it makes the scene feel like the hearth is genuinely illuminating the space around her. Instead of Hestia standing in front of a giant landscape, she's sitting beside the fire. The composition is much more intimate. I think this suits her perfectly. Hestia is also interesting because compared with many of the other Olympians, she isn't known for constantly getting involved with conflicts. She's one of the children of Kronos and Rhea, making her the sister to Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, Hera, Demeter. In the story of Kronos swallowing his children, Hestia was the first swallowed and the last released, which gives her this interesting association with being both first and last. This feels especially appropriate here. She's the final goddess in my project, but symbolically the hearth would have been at the center from the beginning. Hestia also chooses not to marry despite both Poseidon and Apollo seeking her. Instead, she remains independent and devout to her role. And while so much of Greek mythology is filled with gods fighting, competition, betrayal of each other, or even trying to prove their own power, Hestia is remarkably steady. She simply keeps to her hearth. For the animation, I wanted to respect the simplicity. The fire is the main source of movement, while smaller sparks and pieces of flame rise in the air. Hestia stays beside it. Her bright orange mane visually mirrors those flames, while making the fire and the goddess feel connected, even though they're separate. This isn't a destructive fire. It's not even the same kind of fire I used with Hephaestus. Hephaestus' fire is used as a tool. His forge is about heat, metal, invention, and creation. Hestia's flame has a completely different purpose. You gather around it. It gives you light, gives you warmth, cooks food, and is meant to be kept alive. Hestia doesn't conquer fire, she tends to it, and I think that's something beautiful about ending the collection here. And with that, the Olympic Pony project is officially complete. Part 1 and Part 2 have been finished. It may have taken me about a month longer than I originally intended to release Part 2, but I'm glad I finally came back and finished it instead of letting the second half sit unfinished. What started as a simple idea turned the Olympian gods into My Little Pony characters, became a collection of character designs, environment, mythology research, and individual animations. What started as 12 gods technically became 13 designs because I wasn't willing to choose between Dionysus and Hestia. Looking back at both parts, one of my favorite things is how differently each animation represents its character. Hera's peacock tail opening behind her, Hermes flying in and out of view, and Hestia sitting beside the flame of the hearth. If you haven't seen Part 1 yet, definitely go check that out to see Zeus, Poseidon, Demeter, Athena, Ares, Aphrodite, and Hephaestus. And now that the full collection is finished, I want to know which design was your favorite out of all 13. You can also let me know which animation you like the most, or how you would have interpreted one of these gods differently. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like, it really helps support the channel, and let me know if you'd like to see more projects like this. If you're new here, consider subscribing for more character designs, illustration, animation, mythology, My Little Pony, or whatever massive art project I somehow convince myself to do next. Thank you everyone so much for watching. Thank you everyone who was here for Part 1 and waited for Part 2 to came back to see the project finished. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.